Lucius Cornelius Sulla. There's much more to be told about Sulla. He was a remarkable man and he did remarkable things in Rome. His full name was Lucius Cornelius Sulla. He belonged to the noble family. When he was a young man, he was fond of study and became an excellent scholar. He was also a good speaker and often made eloquent speeches in the forum on public affairs. He was a large, strong man with red hair and a ruddy face. He was a great soldier and one of the greatest Roman generals. They called him the Lion because he was so brave in battle. He was so successful in war that he also was given the name Felix, a Latin word which means the fortunate. One of Sulla's greatest wars was against the Greeks. Rome had conquered Greece some time before, and the government of many of the Greek cities were Romans. But because these governors were cruel to the Greeks, the people hated them. Mithridates, the king of Pontus, knew this, and he offered to send his armies to Greece to help to drive the Romans out of the country. The Greeks were very glad of this, and they prepared for war against the Romans. Sulla arrived in Greece with a strong army and began to march through the country. He captured several other cities and compelled them to submit to the Roman governors. Then he marched on to Athens, the capital of the city of Greece, but he found that it was occupied by Archenemy, one of the generals of King Mithridates, who had brought from Asia Minor an army to help the Greeks. Athens at this time was one of the most strongly fortified cities in the world. Its walls were 70 feet high, and they were made of huge blocks of hard, smooth stones. It took thousands of men, many years, to build these massive walls. The city was also well supplied with food. It could hold out against the siege for a long time. For several weeks, Sulla attacked Athens furiously day by day, but it was all in vain. He could not take the city. His soldiers tried many times to mount the high walls, but they could not do it. At last, Sulla had battering rams made. These were engines for breaking down the walls of towns. They were long, heavy beams of wood with iron at the end and formed like the head of a ram. This was why they were called battering rams. At first, they were worked by men with their hands and bodily strength. In later times, they were hung from a crossbeam to swing back and forth so the iron end could strike against the wall with greater force. When a number of battering rams were ready, Sulla began another attack on Athens, but at dead of night, a party of Athenians came out of the city and burned all the battering rams. Sulla quickly had new ones made, and after months of hard labor, the Romans at last succeeded in breaking down the walls and taking Athens. They plundered the beautiful city and destroyed many fine works of art. It is said that they carried off more than 600 pounds of gold and silver. Sulla remained in Athens only long enough to establish Roman authority there once more. Then he departed with his army and marched to Chaeronea, another town of Greece. There he met a force of 120,000 men, which King Mithridates had sent to help the Greeks. The Romans numbered only about 40,000 men, but Sulla was not afraid to fight the immense army of Mithridates. By placing his troops in good positions at the beginning of the battle and afterwards by moving them skillfully from one point to another, he was able to win a great victory. This was a remarkable battle in one aspect. Although there were furious charges and hand-to-hand combats in which thousands upon thousands of the soldiers of Mithridates were slain, the Romans lost only a few men. We are told that when the roll call of the Roman army took place after the battle, only 12 men failed to answer to their names. The army of Mithridates had lost 110,000 men. The Roman, only 12 men. But perhaps we ought not to believe that so very few Romans were killed, for it seems hardly possible that it could have been so. It is certain, however, that Sulla gained a great victory. He also defeated another army sent by Mithridates soon afterwards. Archelaus, the general of the army of Mithridates, then begged for peace. Sulla made terms that were very good for the Romans. Archelaus and Mithridates had to accept them. Mithridates had to give the Romans a large sum of money, 70 ships of war, and the promise to be friends of Rome in the future. Thus the war with Greece ended. Sulla now prepared to return to Italy. He had heard that his wife, children, and friends had been mistreated by Marius in Rome. He was greatly enraged, and in his letter he wrote to the Senate telling them of the victories in Greece, and he included a threat. In return for my services, which have brought honor and glory to Rome, my wife and children have been driven from their homes, my home has been burned, and my friends have been put to death. I am now coming back to punish those who did these things. When the letter was read to the senators, they were very much alarmed. They knew that if Sulla did what he threatened, a dreadful civil war in Rome would ensue. In their reply, the senators begged Sulla not to make war on his own countrymen. They also promised to do their best to bring about a friendly understanding between him and the followers of Marius. Sulla answered that he did not want any understanding with them. I want no friendship with my enemies, he said. I am able to take care of myself. It will be well for them if they can take care of themselves. Soon afterwards, he set out for Italy with his army. Rome was then under power of the Marian party. This party was led by Cinna and by Marius the Younger, the son of the great Marius. When they heard that Sulla was coming, they raised an army and went forth to drive him back. Young Marius said, "Now it will be decided who shall be the master of Rome." A battle was fought between the two armies. It was long and severe, and for a time it seemed as if the Marians would win. Even Sulla himself had no hope of victory, but soon very bad blunders were made by the Marians, turned the tide of the battle in his favor, and he was victorious. He took 6,000 prisoners. Sulla now entered Rome as its master. A cruel master he proved to be. His first act was to have himself appointed dictator for as long a time as he wished to hold the office. Then he commanded that all the followers of Marius should be slain. They were hunted down out of their hiding places, and all put to death without mercy. When every person known to have been connected with the Marian party was killed, the people thought Sulla would cease his murderous work. He did not. He went on killing this one and that one, until at last the Romans became dreadfully frightened. "When will he stop?" they said to one another in trembling tones. One day, a senator had the courage to ask Sulla if he would be pleased to say whom he intended to spare from death. Sulla coolly answered, I have not yet made up my mind, but if it is the wish of the Senate, I will shortly make out a list of persons who must die. Sulla really did make out a list of persons he intended to kill. It was called a proscription list, and was hung up in the forum. Oh, how anxious the poor terror-stricken Romans went to that list to read their names. If a man saw his name was not there, he went away with joy in his heart. But if his name was there on the list, he covered his face with his toga and ran off to hide himself. Each day another longer list of proscribed person was hung up. Anyone who killed a proscribed person was given a large reward in money. But if anyone helped a proscribed person to escape, he was punished by death. This dreadful work was continued until many thousands of people in Rome and throughout Italy were slain. Then Sulla had his triumph in the streets of Rome, and it was the most magnificent procession they had yet been seen in the city. There were hundreds of beautiful horses drawing bright golden chariots. There were long lines of soldiers in glittering armor. There were numbers of slaves, and there were huge wagons containing gold and silver and other precious things that Sulla had won in Greece after his victories over Mithridates. The dictator himself rode in the most splendid chariot of all. He seemed like a king, and indeed was a king in power, though not in name. Sulla, for his own protection, had bodyguard formed of slaves. This bodyguard is said to have numbered 10,000 men. They were called Cornelii, after Sulla's family name. Under the rule of Sulla, his own will was law. He could do whatever he pleased, but he did not remain dictator for a long time. About a year after his triumph, Sulla seemed to be tired of ruling and resigned the office. He then left Rome and went to reside in his country house on the beautiful Bay of Naples. Here he spent the rest of his life, passing his time partly in feasting and merriment and partly in study. He died in 78 BC.